All right, I will go ahead, get started with some of our introductions today. Like I said, we're so happy to have you here. Today, you'll hear from John Lambeth. He's the founder and CEO at Civitas. I'm sure many of you are familiar with him and his work, so we're looking forward to hearing a little from him. And then also joining us today is Chris Adams. He heads up research and insights here at Miles Partnership, and he's going to share some insights as well as we go into today's conversation. And I'm Laura Libby, President of Destination Marketing here at Miles, and will facilitate some of the panel discussions. Our panelists today, we're excited to also be joined by Mike Testa. He's the president and CEO at Visit Sacramento. Mike has been president and CEO there since 2017, but I learned recently he's been there quite a bit longer. I may have some questions for him about that, but in his time, Mike works with his team really to strengthen Sacramento's economic position through creating jobs and improving quality of life. And so I think a lot of the work that he has done is founded in that. And then also joining us today is Cynthia Eichler. And Cynthia has been the president and CEO at Visit Fort Collins since 2015. Her knowledge of the state and the region has really been instrumental in forming the vision she has for how the community works closely, and tourism is integral to that. And so we'll talk with both of them about their TIDs and how they came together, and we'll have a conversation about that shortly. So as I've mentioned today, we will have a conversation about sort of our current situational analysis as it relates to funding. And then John will talk some more about funding options, some enhanced funding options. Then we'll have a panel discussion, but please make sure you submit your Q&A. We'll answer them towards the latter half of our time together, but feel free to submit questions throughout and we will get back to them. So thanks for joining us on that. We look forward to hearing from you as well. So today we're excited because we have a new Funding Futures report. This one has been updated from the one that was done in 2020. You can see it and find it at milespartnership.com/funding futures to read that in depth. Before we go any further, though, I do really want to thank Civitas and Tourism Economics for being founding partners in this and what we did in 2020 and the update that we're looking at here in 2025. This is possible through their contributions of time and expertise. Also want to thank Destinations International and future partners for their support and bringing their expertise to these conversations as well. We think it makes it stronger for the whole industry to have all of the voices represented here today. And so, Chris, if you want to take us through the situational analysis now, I will turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, Laura, and great to be with everybody. So what's the situation with regards to tourism-generated taxes and funding for destination organizations in 2025? So just a reminder that all of this great work started in 2020 and 2021, where we looked at Funding Futures, the first edition, a North American study. There was a complementary European study led by our great friends at Group Now, and that included a set of 10 global best practices with regards to funding and tourism taxation and funding options. So let's step back and have a look at global tourism and with regards to tourism travel related tax revenues. We're talking big sums here. So you can see it's about 10% of the world's economy. We've been doing work with WTTC and Tourism Economics sister agency, Oxford Economics, and they've estimated $3.3 trillion, that's trillion with a T, in both direct and indirect taxes, making up almost 10 cents in every dollar collected by all governments everywhere across the globe. And of course, usually without representation, as typically visitors don't vote. And of course, that makes this funding even more vulnerable because of that reason. In the US, we're talking about $165 billion. You can see the breakdown there between federal and state. And if we drill down into the local tourism area, we saw a very dramatic increase over the 5 years to 2023. So almost a 50% growth to $44 billion in tourism generated taxes and levies. So that includes visitor specific taxes such as TIDs, bed taxes, as well as sales taxes and other taxes directly paid from travel and tourism economic activity. But despite a healthy growth in the budgets of city and county destination organisations, they didn't keep up with that even faster growth in tourism revenues to governments. And because of that reason, we've seen a decline. And this is part of a global trend where tourism-related tax revenues are growing very fast, but usually the money's being remitted back to destination organisations and reinvested in tourism are just frankly not keeping up. And you can see those figures here on this graph, so that in the immediate aftermath of the global financial crisis, there was a slight dip. It recovered for city and county destination organisations to about 9%, which is the long-term average. That's the percentage of tourism-generated taxes that they're receiving, but it's dropped in the last couple of years. States have seen a healthy increase in funding coming out of the pandemic. So they've maintained their 2% of state-related tourism-generated taxes. That's been the long-run average. But they've got some particular political challenges, and that was another issue we've highlighted in Funding Futures, which is government's fiscal challenges. So both at a local, a city, county, and a state level across the United States, and in fact, this applies internationally as well, more and more governments are facing some very significant fiscal challenges. So the Pew Institute, working with the University of Denver, the business school there, their Truth in Accounting project, have been doing these regular annual assessments of every major city in all 50 states. And they identified 27 states, 53 cities as having particularly challenging fiscal positions. And of course, in this situation, funding is going to be under even more severe pressure because politicians are going to be looking for new sources of funding. So moving on, we're also in an environment where communities are demanding more care and thought with regards to managing the impacts of tourism. So whether it's issues around affordable housing, both broadly and specifically for tourism and hospitality workers, whether it's managing short-term rentals in a thoughtful way, whether it's putting money into conservation and managing the natural environment. More and more communities are expecting tourism to be contributing to some of the impacts. And so we not only need to secure our core funding for marketing, but we need newfound money to address some of these sustainable tourism challenges. And in Funding Futures, we pulled together case studies from around the world illustrating how destinations of various types of identifying and using funding for sustainable tourism. So obviously we're in an environment where tourism is fully recovered in most parts of the world. In fact, it's booming in many parts and many destinations. We're seeing tourism revenues grow rapidly, but funding for destination organisations has been under pressure, and that's likely to increase with these fiscal challenges that governments face. And we need to not only secure, of course, our core marketing funding, but find newfound money for destination management and sustainable tourism. So with that, all that in mind, let's ask a question. We've got 2 survey questions today. So how secure do you think your destination organisation funding is? So if you work at a destination organisation, a CVD, a chamber, a state, you can answer on behalf of your organisation. Or if you're another industry or organisation, you could perhaps respond based on how secure you think your local or state tourism organisation is in terms of their funding. So is it highly secure, moderately secure, highly insecure, or you don't know? So we'll just give you another few seconds to finish replying. And we can see the answers here. So the vast majority of people are indicating that they're moderately secure. We've got about just over 11% indicating they're highly secure, obviously in a good place, but fully 25%, a quarter of you are saying they're highly insecure. So that's a great segue to bring in John to talk about what we can do about these challenges to make our funding more secure, sustainable, for all these opportunities we have in the future. John, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. Great job. And I want to say thank you very much to you and Laura both, and to Miles for leading this effort of Funding Futures. This was great. We got together during the pandemic and did the first version, and it's great to have a new updated version out there. Also want to give a shout out to Tourism Economics, and Adam Sachs is another primary partner in this, as well as Destinations International and Future Partners for their work on this. I'm so excited. I get to talk about my favorite topic today, which is enhanced funding for destinations. And we're going to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about what the report includes with respect to that. And in particular, what I'm going to cover is an overview of the funding mechanisms that we've studied and included in the report. Second, giving you the current DMO funding levels, building on what Chris told you about with respect to where we are on funding. Third, a TID update. Fourth, giving you some funding trends, showing you what's happening across the country as it relates to destination funding. And finally, some key takeaways. And just like Chris, I'm going to have a question at the end of my presentation as well. So this is the most comprehensive report on funding, on destination funding that exists. And the mechanisms in particular that we did a deep dive on are listed here on the screen. I'm going to talk about those for just a second. Of course, bed tax. This is still a key source of funding for destinations. And really, this varies a lot from state to state and city to city as to how protected it is. What we see is really a mixed bag. In some places, there are some good protections. In some places, there are not protections around bed tax in terms of that money staying with destinations or being used for promotion. And I would say really the story here is the devil in the details. And there are folks we've worked with to increase their bed tax, to dedicate that money to tourism promotion, and some of them have done a great job. Elliott Ferguson in DC is a great example of that, to really work hard to dedicate that money and make sure it came back to the Bureau. Also, Zach Craig in Oklahoma City did something similar and had some very good success with dedicating bed tax back to tourism promotion. But overall, we have struggled as an industry with bed tax because it is often getting diverted, it is often getting challenged, and that really led to the creation of tourism improvement districts. And of course, tourism improvement districts are growing rapidly. I'm going to give an update on that in just a minute, but this is a way to create stable, dedicated funding that can't be diverted. Sales tax increment financing is growing, but still small across the country. There are only 16 states that have this mechanism, but where it is in use, it is being used in a very strong way. And a great example of that is in Dallas to fund their very large convention center refinancing. It is generating an enormous amount of funds, close to $2 billion for that particular project. Short-term rentals is a very hot key topic for most of our clients. They are looking at both how to make sure that they're included in bed tax collections, as well as there's a good enforcement mechanism. If they have a TID, they want to include them in both of those. And that is certainly a trend we're seeing across the industry. Lots of tourism improvement districts adding those short-term rentals in. And finally, voluntary districts. We're seeing more and more folks get, particularly smaller groups together, if they want to raise some money around a particular issue that might affect a smaller subset of hotels. A voluntary district might be a very good way to make that happen. Well, something that I've wanted to have for 25 years, and now we finally have, is good data on our industry. We, through Civitas Pro, are tracking, and this is an online database portal that we have created with Tourism Economics. It's built on their Symphony platform. We now track 1,400 DMOs across the country, and we can track revenues across the whole industry. So we finally have a really good picture of how we're doing. And this shows that as of 2023, we were a $3.4 billion industry. You can see a sharp decline here in 2020 and growth. Overall, this growth is really modest growth. When we look at inflation over this 6-year period, we find that the growth in our revenue has barely kept up with inflation. And this goes to Chris's numbers earlier. So while it is positive, while we continue to grow, we're not growing at a rate that certainly we'd like to see or will keep up with the growth of the industry. TIDs, of course, are on the move. There are now 216 of these districts worldwide. And again, through PRO, we figured out how much of the money that DMOs raised in total is coming from TIDs. And to our surprise, that number was quite large. It was almost 20% of every dollar that DMOs are getting now across the country are coming from TIDs, a very, very large number. And you can see the states here where there are active TIDs. The orange are showing those that are in process in one way or the other, either through state legislation or developing districts. So there is a lot of activity, and you'll hear more later in the year about how that legislation is going. It's very active right now. There's hearings ongoing in many states, and we'll have more to share on that in the coming months. I do want to give out a shout out to our folks, friends in Seminole County in Florida, that created the first county-wide district in Florida after Tampa created a district there several years ago. And also I saw Bill Deef is on the call today. I want to give him and Melvin Tennant a shout out for the great work they're doing in Minneapolis. I know they're getting very close to getting their district done, and they've had tremendous persistence both in getting a new state law passed and then getting their district completed. So to touch on some trends, I'm going to spend just a minute on trends and what we're seeing. Certainly, of course, in terms of the amount of funding, bed tax is still our bedrock. It is still the largest source of funding. And as I said, it is a mixed bag. People are struggling with it in various states. Some states have had relatively secure bed tax, but it continues to be an issue that we all grapple with. TIDs and TID legislation is growing. There are 10 states that are working on legislation this year to try to get laws passed in their state. I mentioned the increase in voluntary districts. We're seeing that, and I have some examples down below here. Newport Beach, California, within the last year and a half, converted their compulsory TID to a voluntary district, and that's a 3% charge on lodging that they use specifically for sales activities. Sedona put together a voluntary district because they don't have TID authority, $2 to $5 on lodging for marketing. They're doing a great job with that. And a little bit different take, Whitefish, Montana put together a voluntary district on lodging and car rental, and that's being used more for education of visitors and affordable housing kinds of activities. So something very different in the industry, but it just shows there's a lot of diversity and lots of different ways to use that. And finally, we're also seeing sales tax increment grow, but grow at a pretty slow rate. It's pretty hard. For the most part, you need new legislation in your state to be able to do that. I'll tell you, diversion of DMO funding is a hot topic. I don't have to tell the folks on this call about that. You see it, you read about it. There's no better example than what's happening right now as we speak in Florida and in Colorado. Diversion of DMO funding is out there, and it's something that we need to be aware of and be really mindful of how we can respond to the challenges that come forward. So the most common levers that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years to divert or take away DMO funding has been either a call for using our money for affordable housing or using it for infrastructure. There was a bill in Colorado, HB 1117 back in 22, that allowed for up to 90% of the funding to be diverted from destinations to be used for affordable housing kinds of activities. And some folks there are reporting out that bureaus so far in aggregate have lost $39 million a year because of that bill. And that is continuing to grow. South Carolina 2 years ago passed a bill that allowed for a diversion up to 15% of their bed tax to be used for affordable housing and other kinds of activities. And of course, we have a rash of legislation in 2025. There are actually 6 bills in Florida. That says 5. There's another one, 6 bills we're tracking in Florida that have a whole number of implications and will have really could have dramatic impacts on the industry. Some of them aren't going to move, and this is part of the political landscape in Florida. But there is at least one, there are two that passed out of committee 2 days ago. They were first introduced and came onto our radar on Monday, and on Tuesday they passed out a committee specifically allowing for all bed tax money to be diverted for property tax relief. Now, we're all optimistic that's not going to end there, but it is something that's out there and something to watch for, because as these things get introduced in one state, it gives legislators in another state an idea to do the same. And we sometimes see these kinds of activities go from one state to the other. The other bill I wanted to highlight is another damaging bill in Colorado that allows county bed taxes to be increased by up to 3% additional, and can use that money for all non-tourism promotion related kinds of things: infrastructure, preservation of habitats, historical preservation and cultural preservation, as well as public safety. Another trend I wanted to mention is short-term rentals. I mentioned this at the outset. It's now 14.2% of total lodging demand, and it's growing quickly. What we are looking at in most destinations is how do we help cities and counties, as well as states and our own local partners, with the professional management of STRs. And what do I mean by that? Adopting good policies as it relates to STRs and around the funding and how they pay and who pays, as well as good enforcement mechanisms. And we have, over the last couple of years, been working much more closely with the platforms. Most of them say that they want a level playing field. Some are easier to get there than others, but we have been very creative in the ways we've had local governments adopt ordinances to make sure that those collections are happening at the platform level. There are more taxes and more assessments being levied on STRs each day, and we're seeing that. If you're a jurisdiction that's already done this, congratulations to you, terrific. If you're one that hasn't, this is something to look at. We're amending a lot of TIDs to include STRs. And a bill I wanted to highlight, this year in California, there's a bill, we'll see where it goes, but it is specifically requiring hosting platforms to provide reports on STR data. Really interesting, because it's information that historically most of them have been reluctant to give up, and the California legislature is considering forcing them to share that information. Finally, my last slide before our question, key takeaways. First, despite increasing revenues from visitors, there is growing pressure on DMO funding. We see it every day. Chris highlighted this. You can see it in the articles I put up and the stories I'm sharing with you. It is out there. It is real. It is something we're dealing with on a daily basis. It's really important, I think, for all DMOs to understand their vulnerabilities in current funding. This is something that we really harp on, because so often folks think their funding may be secure, only to find out at the time of a crisis or the time of a particular storm that their funding is not nearly as stable as they thought and can be diverted. This is a new one. Get information on whether your state or local government intends to launch a DOGE program. 26 states now have done something related to using DOGE at the state level, including yesterday. There was an article in AP that talked about the governor of Texas signing a bill yesterday to launch the DOGE program in Texas. We've also seen this at a local level in some states, that there are some local governments talking about using a DOGE-like program at the local level. There is an upcoming webinar on this. I want to put this on your calendars for C-suite level folks. Monday, this coming Monday, Destinations International is doing a webinar on DOGE issues. That's going to be at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern time, and you can reach out to either Taylor or Sophia there at DI to talk to them about that webinar. Finally, investigate short-term rental policy and enforcement opportunities. And we're seeing some folks really explore kind of a structured micro voluntary district where they put just a smaller group of hotels together to accomplish some objectives. So with that, we're going to turn now to our next question for everybody out there. Is your organization planning to add or significantly enhance a funding mechanism in the next 2 years? So in the next 2 years, are you planning to do something? This could include things like bed tax. It could include a TID. It could include tax increment financing or another stable funding source. Are there things that you all are looking for? We thought it would be interesting for the group to learn, at least for the folks that are on this Zoom, whether or not they are interested in actively looking at those kinds of options. So please cast your votes. Okay, and our initial reaction here, boy, we're really all over the map. It looks like it's almost divided evenly between the 5 categories, about 20% in each, with not sure being the highest, but no plans, 20%, possibly at 26, likely at 12, and very likely or definitely at 15. So if you put those 2 categories, likely and very likely, together, that would be a 27%. So that's interesting, and that fits pretty well with what we're seeing, that there are some folks that are just in really great shape and aren't doing it, and others that aren't, and some folks that are sort of in the middle. So thank you for that, and boy, we sure appreciate you tuning in today, and I hope you find use in this new report that is, of course, free to everybody to download. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Appreciate Chris, John, both of you setting the stage for this. Now, Cynthia and Mike, if you'll join me as we get ourselves set up for a conversation here. So thank you, guys. I think that was it's interesting to see what has changed in the last 5 years and maybe what hasn't changed as much as we might have thought. So Cynthia, Mike, thank you guys for joining us today. We wanted to talk a little more specifically about a couple of districts that exist. And so we'll have a few questions here with you guys, but I'd love to open it up asking you both, what was the sort of primary motivation aside from stable funding, but what was it that sort of got your stakeholders behind you? How did you build that sort of quorum for the success of the building and establishment of your districts? And Mike, I know you have 2, so you might have two thoughts on that. So I don't know which of you would like to start. Cynthia, you want to jump in since you are newest to the TID and this the 2 of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We had begun a destination master plan that recognized we were underfunded. And so that had just gotten started, and then COVID started, and it became almost self-rescue, recognizing that no one was coming to save tourism. And so how did we help ourselves? We ended up with very high support from our city leadership, and we're really grateful for that. So it passed in 2021. We passed this pretty quickly, and then have been able to put it to good use for a variety of things here in Fort Collins, which we're really grateful. And John and his team were fantastic at helping us make sure that we crossed the finish line with positive news.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's exciting to have seen it come together so fast. Mike, I know you have two districts in there, and they've got slightly different purposes, but how did you build the sort of momentum behind maybe even just getting the second after the first, or how did that process go for you? And I think you're still on mute.
Thank you for that. I've only been doing Zooms now for about 4 years. So you'd think I'd
That's
have
okay.
it.
They're new to all of us.
Very similar to Cynthia. We were underfunded as an organization. You know, Sacramento isn't necessarily an intuitive tourism destination. So I think having that conversation with government funding sources, they didn't always see the value of investing. So we really had to create that argument. What is the long-term benefit? What's the ROI of creating a district? And then once you create that vision for your stakeholders as well, that buy-off was an easier sell. I think for the second district, it was really about an infrastructure district. We had a very old convention center that hadn't been updated in about 25 years. We were losing business because of it. A lot of our competitors had updated their convention centers. So it was the combination of a new mayor and a new city manager and a larger vision of what Sacramento could become. At that point, we had proved ourselves as a legitimate destination. So it was the public investment in the building and what would that return to the public be. So we created that with data. I think we learned very quickly in this conversation that it can't just be a trust us, we know what we're doing, we're going to bring visitors here. You really had to show that path. You had to show what happened in other markets and how that translated back to Sacramento.
Yeah, no, that's good tips. Kind of jumping into some specifics, Cynthia, John mentioned some of the pressures, legislative pressures in Colorado that are happening sort of simultaneous to the establishment of your district and others. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like and what some of those numbers are that John kind of mentioned earlier?
Absolutely. And John is spot on. In Colorado, we've had counties who have come to the table. We have cities who are home rule, and that simply means the cities can formate much easier. And so counties, we're looking for an opportunity to do that as well. I would say that most of the time with our counties, they are looking for very different things for results from taxing tourism. And so far more in infrastructure, far more of a childcare and housing. I would say particularly for our mountain towns, that's a real challenge. We see it some along the Front Range also, but those are such burning needs. We have started to use language, I think, in Colorado to talk about if you're draining one bucket, you're not filling the other one at the same pace. And so to be really wise about what those percentages go for and how you utilize those. But we are watching those very carefully and, of course, advocating for continuing great funding for marketing. But it is definitely causing some pressure.
Yeah, and in Fort Collins, are you having to address that at the county level or city level now, or are you sort of proactively trying to get ahead of it, or how are you working on that part?
I think because we were fortunate to have the TID come sooner in the process, it has buffered us a little bit. It also gave us an opportunity for advocacy to work on those relationships, to be a friend before you need a friend, if you will, and be prepared for that. So we work hard to be a trusted advisor in that space and to work with our county commissioners. We have somebody on our board, of course, that deals within open space and parks and rec, so that we're all talking the same language and how these things will interact and really affect our community. So far we are in a good spot. We do not take that for granted. And I think that relationship building and the communication is just so key to being hopefully on the right side of those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. And Mike, shifting a little bit, you've made an effort to work with the short-term rentals. Chris talked some about that. John talked some about that. And it's sort of threaded throughout the study. How have you navigated the inclusion of those short-term rentals? And maybe what are some of the biggest challenges and maybe what's worked well? Like what's been a big win for you in that?
Yeah, it certainly has been a challenge. As John mentioned, the percentage of short-term rentals in most markets is significant, especially in a place like Sacramento where we struggle with a lack of hotel inventory. Those short-term rentals become really critical when we go after big events. So we thought we had the right language in our management district plan for our TID to include them, but I asked the question of Airbnb, and that was a challenge itself, finding the right contact at Airbnb. But I asked that question of why are they not paying into the district, and the response basically told me why they weren't. They argued the language again. So at the time, and this is why I asked the question, we were in the process of renewing our district. So we were creating new language. So they essentially gave me the answer to the test of the language we need to create in our new district, which we did. That compelled them, after a couple of phone calls, to pay into the district. And the economics and the revenue being driven by that is significant. I think the total revenue we drove from short-term rentals last year was in the low five figures. And this year it'll be pretty significant in the six figures. So again, I think it was understanding what would compel them to follow the guidelines of the management district plan. They may have attorneys that see the language differently. And candidly, it was a bit of a slog to get what we needed. But ultimately, they did come to the table. They did ultimately agree that it was their responsibility to pay into that. So I think sometimes trying to figure out what is the wording and what will compel them to be a part, because the reality is the marketing that we do fills the short-term rentals. And that was on the backs of the hotels until the short-term rentals started paying their fair share. So that was an important conversation.
Sure. And how do you manage the compliance, the sort of ongoing enforcement mechanisms that are part of that?
It's very similar to how our city and county collect the transient occupancy tax through hotels. Airbnb, it's somewhat of an honor system. They are writing a flat check at the percentage rate in our district. So they are essentially, telling the city and the county, we have this many short-term rentals in your market. The city and county have those permitted rentals too, so they can compare those numbers. So it's somewhat of an honor system for Airbnb, but again, when it's compared to the data that the city and county already have, that's really how it's enforced and made sure that they're complying.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cynthia, how is your district, or have you explored short-term rentals within your district or engaged with them? Where's the status of that for you?
Yeah, currently, for our district, short-term rentals are not included. Some of that was actually at the request of our hotel friends, when we were starting the TID, is that they felt it would take too much time and too much education, where hoteliers understood the concept and would be willing to move through the process sooner. So that was the path we have taken. Mike, I would tell you, I admire your second path. And it is one that I think we'll continue to explore when we get to that point. We're not quite to our halfway point, but we are very mindful, and we agree too that, of course, our short-term rentals benefit dramatically. We do communicate with those folks and provide information for them because we want to teach them to be great hosts. And again, play big in that trusted advisor space. So I think that'll be a step 2 for us when it's time for renewal.
And Cynthia, I think that's a really important point. We engaged the short-term rentals as we were going through renewal, because initially there was pushback. They didn't want to pay into the district, and ultimately the mothership of Airbnb pays. But we educated the operators locally. These are the events that we're doing. Look at your calendar. Your busiest month is October, right? That's when the music festival's here. That's when Ironman's here. So once they saw that we were creating those opportunities for them, we found some advocates. So a lot of it, Cynthia, to your point, is education, making sure that they know the work that the DMO is doing is benefiting them directly, and suddenly they become champions.
That's a really good point. I wonder if both of you, like, maybe each answer this in the way that it fits, because you're in different stages of the longevity of your districts, but what are some of the challenges that you face in sort of maintaining support and continuing to move the district forward and reporting on it? Like, how, as different stakeholders change and different people change, how do you keep up that support? Mike, I'll let you. Oh, go ahead, Cynthia.
That's okay. It can be challenging in our market. We see our GMs change a bit, you see your DOSs. And so being really active with those communications, we do something we call a quarterly coffee to make sure that we're gathering our hoteliers specifically different from other members, so that they have time with us independently. They have their own budget, they have their own board. So we do have some consistent ways that we communicate with them. I will also say that I talk with my team every day, that by the time we get to renewal time, there should be nothing that's a surprise for our stakeholders, and that it should be easy to renew. So we try to keep it in that vein of everything we're doing each day just makes that conversation easier when we get to the end of our initial time frame.
Yeah, I think for us, it's similar. It's communication, making sure that you are touting the things that you're doing, making sure that your stakeholders are aware of the work you're doing. I've had people say throughout the years, I never see your marketing or your advertising. And I always say, that's because you live here. You're not our audience. So oftentimes we forget that the people who live here and the stakeholders who are here are really important to the messaging, and frankly, to getting the credit for the work that we're doing. So, I think one of my proudest moments was during the pandemic, as the city of Sacramento was getting federal funding. And I started my pitch to some of the local council members of why they should give some of that funding to Visit Sacramento. And one of them stopped me and said, you guys have done a great job educating me over the last 3 years. You don't need to sell me on this. We want to support what you guys are doing. So Cynthia, I think you said this earlier, create those friendships and those relationships early, so you don't have to go into the meeting and they ask, well, wait a minute, now who are you? I think as often as elected officials change, as often as GMs change, you have to keep consistent and make those new relationships as warranted.
Good advice. A question did come in, Mike, I think, how did you engage with the short-term rentals? There some clarity around how to talk to them or start that, and I think, follow-up, was it owner approval, or did you go to individual owners? How did that process go?
So we initially started by just friends who I knew operated Airbnbs and asking them how I could get in touch with the larger group, and was told by a couple of them there are some messaging boards that we all use. So I had one of them post a message that we want to talk about this new assessment that's coming their way. And again, they had their pitchforks and torches initially for that conversation. I think that first call we had about 16 operators. And once you educated that first group, I think they do communicate frequently as a community. And once we educated them, that talk started to calm, I think, some of the concerns. They did vote individually for our assessment. So they got petitions, all the short-term rentals did. And, we didn't get all of them certainly, but we had enough that it mattered. And when we went in front of our city council, we had representatives from Airbnb and the short-term rental community testifying on behalf of the district that it would be a positive thing. So again, you're not going to capture 100% of them, but if you can get a sampling of people who are up at the dais and the podium saying the work that Visit Sacramento does is really important to our business, it's a really valuable thing.
Cynthia, would you add anything as you're expanding your engagement there?
One thing we have done, and it's because our municipal partners are also great, at least annually, they send out information to our STRs to say, did you know, right? That you can come get information for your locations to share with your guests who are staying, or come to the mixers at Visit so you can learn about resources and connect with others too. That has been really helpful because we don't have that direct contact with them, but our city partners have been really gracious at making sure that we do at least an annual connection so that either returning or new owners are aware of who we are and what we do.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And this question came in, I think, for both of you. They're asking if you have any examples of specific data points, sort of back to our starting point on this conversation, but do you have specific data points or inspirational storytelling that got your stakeholders excited about the formation of the district, and sort of how did you lay out that case for both hoteliers or restaurants or sort of all that make up your district? So I don't know, Mike, if you want to talk about that first, and Cynthia.
Yeah, I think for us, especially with the expansion of our convention center, it's what type of meetings will we be able to go after with the new building and show that visitation to the market will be increased. We ran a lot of calculator scenarios where we could say that this will create X jobs, which really resonated with the elected officials. This will bring in X new customers for your restaurants, which obviously resonated with the hospitality community. And then you talk about the overall impact. So again, it's data. If you can go to a small business owner and say, I'll be able to help your bottom line with something like this, then you start to build those champions. And I think for elected officials, you have to figure out what matters to them, because our industry, I think, as all of us know, has so many benefits that come from so many different directions. So find the stream that the elected official is passionate about and tell them how you'll help them achieve what their goals are.
Yeah, and you recently, I'm not sure if it was last year, but signed that 10-year citywide agreement with Unified Wine and Grape, which I think sort of demonstrates, see, I told you so, a little bit in that.
And that's what we told the electeds. That's the largest convention in Sacramento. We had the commitment from them. If we were able to increase the space, which will allow them to bring in more vendors and drive more revenue, they would sign a 10-year deal. So that was part of the conversation, because when that event is in town, it is impossible to miss. So everybody knows how big that is for Sacramento.
Yeah, that's great. Cynthia, any recommendations or talking points?
I think, like Mike said too, find a champion. We ended up with two, one from a boutique hotel and one from our largest Marriott in town. And so they both had come from different markets who had some touch point with this, either on a statewide basis or locally. And they were able to look at their peers and go, this is not scary. It will not hurt you. What it will do is make a better budget for the folks that visit to do these things. So those two people were really pivotal for us. And I think that was helpful also because we were in that COVID timeframe. We had to have a reduction in force. And one of the things that we talked with, this is a, what do your people care about, right? Mike, like versus your municipal folks versus your hoteliers. And so the very first thing we did was rehire sales department. That is one of those things that was just non-negotiable for them. And now they're just singing the praises, and that pipeline is filling with business that has come from those folks specifically. And we actually got to expand. A quick second thing was in that advocacy space, we opened a new welcome center that is used throughout the community. We have 3,000 square feet, and we have the first 100 days of 2025, we have hosted 107 events as well as visitor services. So it helps your residents also connect to what this is. So those have been two really effective things for us.
Yeah, that's really good. I would love, before we bring back John and Chris to answer a few questions too, do you have any other advice you would give to the DMOs who are starting out the pursuit of their TIDs or other sort of maybe it's an infrastructure, maybe it's marketing, but do you have other advice or support words you might offer? Cynthia, you want to go first?
I think it's just start. Don't be afraid, jump in. If there's somebody in your area that has done this, I had friends that visit Aurora and visit Denver who were both really helpful in reaching out from a practical side of things. I was able to put attorneys from our city with their city to help, attorneys speak the language together and bring that angst down a little bit or understand fully. And so I think, tourism is so amazing and we can all call each other, and I'm happy to answer questions for anyone also. But don't be shy, find your champions, find your tribe, and keep going.
Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, I agree. Finding champions is really critical. Other folks who can help sell the value on this. And again, for me, it's about data. You're asking people to invest. So what's the return on that investment? And I think, the last thing I'd say is the education piece. You've got hoteliers who initially said, well, we can't afford this, and you had to educate them. You're passing it on to the guest. The guest is actually funding this assessment. It's not coming out of your bottom line. So once people realize the facts and what the return is, it becomes a much easier sell. And I think you also have a lot of communities you can point to. They've done it, and this is the return, and ours will be similar.
Yeah, well, that's great. I thank you guys. Thank you both for sort of sharing the experiences from your destinations and the successes you've had. I'd love to invite Chris and John to join us again. We've got a few more questions that have come in. Cynthia, Mike, if you want to stay on, you certainly can. That you may have some things to add to this while we're talking also. Hi, welcome back. John, I think this first one, maybe I'll direct to you, and then if there's some other people who want to add on. But one of the questions that came in is the state hasn't yet enabled TIDs, but one of the biggest DMOs includes 2 large Native American casinos on sovereign tribal land. Do you know how that would work with an assessment or a future TID? Do you have any experience with the sovereign land and TIDs with this that you could guide?
We do, and it's a great question. Because those tribes are sovereign, typically they are not subject to assessment either by the state or local government. So they aren't usually assessed as part of TIDs, but we've had a lot of clients work well with their local tribes and figure out sort of voluntary in lieu payments that they can make. Some do it just on an annual basis. Some will sign multi-year contracts, but there are a lot of tribes that are paying what we would consider their fair share of TID for their lodging. And there are other places where they haven't been as successful at getting them. So it's about really cutting a deal with the tribes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think I want to go back because a couple questions here and some of the things we talked about, Mike and Cynthia talked about, given the research, Chris, you and John have done, one of the questions that came in is that while there's been some good STR work, some short-term rentals, the hotel community has really seen it in this community as a loss of market share, and they're still not really abiding by a lot of the regulations, ADA regulations, safety regulations that the hotels have to. So that is having a very adverse reaction. How do you suggest tackling that? I'm sure you've seen that in other places, but John, I don't know if you want to start first, and then Chris, in your research, if you've seen some case studies of where it's gone well.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. It's really interesting to me because different hotel groups react differently to that issue. I've had groups of hotels when we're working on a new funding mechanism say, we don't want the short-term rentals in for all the reasons you just said. They're not playing by the same rules. We don't want them in the decision-making tree. So we don't want them on the board that's making decisions of this. We don't want to feel obligated to directly market to them. So we don't want them. That I would say is a minority view, although there are some places that definitely hold that view. Other places, the hotels say, we definitely want them in. In fact, we don't want them in, and we don't want to be in unless they're in as well, because we want a level playing field. We want to make sure everybody's paying the same. And if we're in, they're in. That's the more common thing we see, but it can go either way. And it's interesting the variety of reactions we get from hotels with respect to how should short-term rentals be included both in bed tax and TID.
Yeah, and I'd add to that every major hotel group has an investment in short-term rental, vacation rental properties. So it's a part of their business plan already. I think John's completely right. It's about engaging with both the hotel community and the short-term rental community. And as Mike and Cynthia shared, identified that there's a win-win situation here. If you want to move towards a more formal management and licensing model, which we're seeing increasingly around the world, and I've put up in the chat and in the answer an article which pulls together global best practices, including many destinations who are moving in that direction. That formalizes your communication with the short-term rental community, because to get licensed, and if you've got the right legislation to get listed on the major platforms, you need to basically register and then obviously communicate directly with both the destination organization, the local city, county, etc. And so I think there's definitely a win-win situation here.
Thank you. And this one, I don't know, you all may have a take on this question. We're asking, has anyone used any third-party platforms such as AirDNA or others to help with the sort of engagement with short-term rentals and the monitoring of how that's going, or any other vendors that have helped in this process in reporting? I don't know, Cynthia and Mike, if you work with any third-party vendors or if it's all through the city.
We've done a little work with their DNA, certainly. Again, especially in the initial stages, we were trying to get as much information as we could. So we went to as many sources as we could. I think the city and the county, just because the permitting goes through them, have been very helpful and the most accurate, but certainly there was value in working with AirDNA and some of the other groups as well. Again, you want as much information as you can get when you start this.
Yeah, I think I've got time for one more question, and John, maybe this one is for you to start. Can you talk a little bit more about the establishment of a voluntary district? How does that process get going? How does it differ from the TID, more traditional one?
Happy to, Laura, and it's really pretty simple. The idea of a voluntary district is we are, instead of using the government to create a level playing field, we are, by private agreement, getting folks to engage in a very similar kind of activity as they would in a TID. So in a voluntary agreement, we don't do anything with the city or county or state. It is it are essentially private agreements between the hotels and the Bureau. And basically, those agreements say that the hotels agree to raise additional money from their customers, maybe 1% or 2%, and forward those revenues to the Bureau, and the Bureau agrees to provide marketing and sales and other Bureau-like services. And so it really is about getting a critical mass. There are some that only have 3 or 4 hotels in them. We've done some of these kind of contractual arrangements with a one-off hotel that's outside the boundaries of a jurisdiction. And others where, like in Sedona, I think they have 18 hotels now who have all signed essentially the same agreement, that are paying in, that are providing those funds for essentially moving the needle, driving more overnight stays for those hotels.
And does it create a board similar, like is there an oversight board or for those voluntary, like in Sedona, is it more of a, like just report out?
No, there typically would be a board that would made up of hoteliers that would control the money. If there's already existing nonprofit, they might just be as simple as using the nonprofit of the DMO. Or if there isn't, or there's some other issue with that, you certainly can create a new nonprofit that would be the recipient of that money and would contract with the hotels.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think those are the questions that we have here as we're winding down. So thank you all for joining us. Cynthia, Mike, thanks for sharing your experience with us in the discussion. John and Chris, thanks for all of your work putting the putting the presentation together and putting the study together. I've got a couple of things I wanted to share with everyone as we're wrapping up. One, to get one more webinar on your calendar. I know John mentioned one with DI. We have another one, not on DOGE or on funding, but on harnessing the power of AI, another topic that is on the top of everyone's mind. So we invite you to join us with Focusrite on Thursday, May 15th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time to enjoy that content. You can register for it there at the website, Miles Partnership cntya.com/webinars. You'll see it listed there. So join us. That should be a wonderful one. And then again, just want to share the link out where you can find the 2025 edition of the Funding Futures Study and all the detail of what we talked about here today. And I saw that John and Chris both had shared contact information in the chat, but feel free to reach out to anyone on the call if you have any questions or things that we can help with. Like Cynthia said, it's a community that wants to help each other be successful. So I think I encourage you all to take advantage of that. So with that, I want to say thank you again for coming. We appreciate it and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Laura. Great job.
Thanks.